Thanks. Okay, so thank you for joining us for Substantial Damage Estimator Overview. So last month we went over post-flood responsibilities, and so that was kind of more disaster focused, and so this is actually about doing the assessments once structures in the floodplain have been damaged, and so we'll go over that process and FEMA's software for doing that. Well, it looks like that. Okay, so first we'll go over kind of the background of the software. So there are some publications that go with this that are really helpful. Um, when and where to do assessments, and then a little bit about using the software for damage estimations, and then finally resolution of conflicts. And so um, sometimes I had done a live demo of the software, but I'm on a different laptop today, so I don't have it downloaded, but I would highly recommend just downloading it. It's free to download and use, and then just kind of getting comfortable with it, and then putting together your database ahead of time before something happens. That's what we recommend, so we'll go over that. So these are some of the publications that I had mentioned. So definitely Substantial Improvement and Substantial Damage goes over the process and the requirements, what has to be included, what can be excluded, and so we'll go over some of that and just the basic rules about the 50% and how to determine market value and the cost of damage. So some of that material will be covered in the next hour. And then the user manual and field workbook are really useful. So the user manual goes over how the software works, how to do imports and exports, and it has a lot of tips for assembling your team and training your team and how to organize that and do quality control of your collected data and things of that nature, which again is kind of more what we're focused on today is the actual software and doing the assessments and collecting that data. And then the field workbook is really helpful. It tells you what to look for in the field and how to gauge the level of damage and organizing your photos and taking establishing shots and what are the best practices. And there's also this, which is literally the best practices. And so this is a short little 16-page document that, as you can see, this is the table of contents. It goes over use of tax data, plat maps, survey maps, collecting the data, how to enter the data, the difference between residential and non-residential assessments. So the software splits those up between residential and non-residential, the types of characteristics that you're looking at for a structure that's been damaged. Lack of address, using GPS data, the digital photos. So all of that is available in this very short document. So I would definitely recommend downloading all of those and just having them on hand for when you would need to pull them out. And I use the substantial improvement desk reference quite often. It's very detailed. It's a much longer document, but all of those are helpful. And then if you run into trouble, there is a FEMA building science helpline. So that is the number that you can call or email if you needed additional assistance with the FEMA stuff. Yeah, I don't know how that's been impacted by recent layoffs and things like that, but it is still a resource that's available. And then there are some other additional trainings that you can do via FEMA's independent study courses that they have available. So you can take these online and they are worth credit. Just a little bit of CECs, but they do have the substantial damage estimator training modules. So you can go through these and work through some fake data, and they walk you through doing an actual assessment. And so we kind of have that today, but not quite as in depth as that, because that course takes like maybe 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours to get through. So it's much more detailed if you're interested in that. So it's IS 284A using the damage estimator. So I have done that. But it's, sorry, just a second. It does guide you through using the software and the values that you should be seeing the same results. And then most importantly, again, just familiarizing yourself with the software and how it works. And I did see in the survey that someone asked if there had been any updates. No, not really. It's still the same software from 2020 and it's version 3.0. I don't, I have not heard of any plans to update that. And I think it's pretty user friendly and it's, useful. And I don't have any complaints about the current version or anything. So we only have to do substantial damage estimation in the 1% annual chance flood zones. So the base flood zone, your mapped floodplain, as it's also referred to, and the special flood hazard area, all interchangeable terms. And so that's the only place that you are supposed to do estimations is in your adopted floodplain, although some communities do regulate outside that area. Some of them have adopted the 500-year to regulate, or a future conditions area, or other types of non-regulatory areas that would have to be assessed. But for most communities, it's just the regulatory FEMA floodplain. So your zone A's, AE, AH, AO, and any A1 through 30 if you have an older map. So in this example, where would we have to do estimations should these houses be damaged? And so it's only the area that's in the blue line. So the house that's kind of half in and half out would be considered to be in the floodplain because it's touching the structure, so that one would also have to be assessed. Whereas the house number 2 that's being pointed at is not in the regulatory floodplain, so it can just be repaired, and whatever building permit that might be required or other permitting, we just don't have to worry about it from a floodplain perspective. So then the number 1 arrow that's pointing at those houses, those do have to be assessed, and if they are 50% or more of the market value, is the cost to repair to its pre-damage condition, then it has to be brought into compliance, which could mean having to elevate that structure. So this is a difficult part of floodplain management, and people are not happy when you tell them that they have to elevate their house and or maybe fill in a basement. Like this just happened to me recently that I had to tell someone that and they were not happy with me. So and it's going to be stressful, especially if you have a large area that has been damaged and you're going to be dealing with people that are very emotional and stressed and losing their home. So it's good to be prepared for that. And so it's good to train like this and to have all of this stuff ready to go before something happens that will help you. So here's another example. So we did show this map in our post-flood responsibility class, but basically when you have something happen, like here in Kansas, we have, tornadoes that in this case basically followed the path of their floodplain, unfortunately. So the green dots on here are the houses. And so the city put together a map that shows the floodplain parcels that they have, so the structures in their floodplain, and then they overlaid it with the tornado path to evaluate what the scope is that they would have to assess. And so all of the houses that have been damaged by this tornado that are in the floodplain have to be assessed. And so that's basically step 1. Once something happens, that you would assess what the scope is, how many structures do you have that have to be assessed. So you can see there are plenty of structures outside of the floodplain that would not have to be assessed. So yeah, there's houses that don't have to be assessed, and basically just the ones that are in the floodplain that were in the tornado path are what we're worried about. So that's what we do to determine the areas for substantial damage. And of course, if something like this happens, you should let us know immediately, and we are available to assist with any disaster recovery efforts. So these were inundated and damaged by the tornadoes. So that's when we're going to do it. Basically, if you're in the NFIP, you are required to do these assessments. And so there's been a lot of confusion about this, and substantial damage is, I think, maybe one of the least understood things about the NFIP and this requirement to come into compliance with the current regulations. So it's that and the fact that substantial improvement and damage are basically two sides of the same coin. They both work that way. And so we'll go over those definitions next, but it's also damage from any sorts. It's not just flooding. It can be, like you just saw, a tornado. It can be a fire of one house. It could be an earthquake, and that includes flooding. And so this is a part of the agreement with FEMA that every community adopts, is enforcing substantial damage from any cause. And it can be difficult, especially when it's fire or something non-flood related, that people really don't understand how floodplain regulations come into play in that case, but they absolutely do if you're in the special flood hazard area. So substantial damage, and these definitions are in every ordinance or resolution or code for a participating community. And I think it's interesting the way our ordinance kind of just talks about substantial damage, but it basically, substantial damage is included in the same definition. So again, it's damage from any origin sustained by a structure where the cost of restoring it to its pre-damage condition, not perfect, pristine condition, but just whatever it was pre-damaged, if that equals or exceeds 50% of the market value, then it has to come into compliance. And the same thing for improvement. Any reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or other improvements, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value, then it has to come into compliance with the current regulations. So again, making sure the lowest floor is above the base flood elevation to whatever level your ordinance has adopted. So instead of the pre-damage condition, it's whatever it is before the start of construction for improvement. So basically, they're the same thing, damage versus improvement. It's just whatever that cost is and the threshold. And so some communities have adopted cumulative improvement, which means we're counting 50% over 5 years or maybe even 10 years. Or there can be a lower threshold. Some communities have adopted like maybe 30% instead of 50%. And so FEMA encourages stronger regulations, higher than the NFIP minimums. So some communities do have that, so it will depend on what your ordinance says. And so it includes structures which have incurred substantial damage regardless of the actual repair work performed. So sometimes a homeowner will decide not to repair all of the damage. We're still counting whatever the cost would be, whether or not they actually do those repairs. And then if there have been violations that have been cited by a community official with the authority to cite that, such as outdated electrical wiring or something like that, something that's been cited from the local health, sanitary, or safety code, that can be excluded if it's been actually cited by a community enforcement official. And then also any alteration of a historic structure, provided that the alteration will not preclude it from continuing to be a historic structure. So we do have some of those that are designated by like a historical society and stuff like that. So ideally, so these are the ideal steps that you would follow to assemble a team and then train them and then get them out there and do the assessments. And I understand a lot of communities are understaffed and they don't have that availability. As I said, we're available to assist, but it's going to depend on how widespread the disaster is and how many communities need assistance. If it's widespread, we might be spread a little bit thin, and then you would basically need 3 days and a declaration to be able to access FEMA resources for that. So it may not work out this well. You may not have that many people to help you, but ideally you would have enough to have teams of 2 people going out, as many as you can. But basically, step one, I would think most usually would be the floodplain administrator who acts as the SDE manager. So basically, you're overseeing everyone and you're the main organizer of the teams. So you would identify your resources. How many people do you have? You should notify officials that work with the community, um, these other departments. So you should notify the fire, police, emergency management, your planning department, the building department. Let them know that you have to do these assessments and then process them. Notify property owners before they can get permits to repair their structures. And so that's why it's important to have as much of this assembled before something happens as much as possible, just because people are going to try to rebuild immediately. That's usually how disasters go. And so if you can establish this process um, beforehand, then you can just immediately get started. And our post-flood responsibility kind of goes into that as well. And I did just send out a substantial damage plan that communities can customize for themselves. So we're trying to find communities that would be interested in creating their own plan, and that will have all of these steps laid out for you, and it would be specific to your community, and maybe identify other communities that would help you, etc. All of these minute details that would help you be prepared in the event of a disaster. So if you do, um, see that email from me, if you want to participate in that, please let me know so we can assist you however we can. It's also worth CRS points. But yeah, so the SDE manager organizes everyone. You alert these other departments that you have to do assessments and that you'll be processing them before they should issue any permits, and to let fire and police know that you have to enter people's houses. And so making sure that they're aware of what you're doing and that you wear identification and stuff like that. Then you again establish what the scope is. What are the limits of the inventory, all of the damaged structures in the special flood hazard area, and then coordinate those addresses and get a tax parcel map or property boundaries. So putting together a map is very helpful to help you establish your scope and identify which properties need to be assessed. So then you can do your windshield assessment, which basically means you drive through these disaster areas um, as soon as it's safe to do so, and then start prioritizing which ones need to be looked at first. Um, and so basically, I explained this in the last class as well. You want to prioritize the ones that are most medium damaged. So if something is obviously destroyed and obviously beyond 50%, you can just ignore it at first because those people are not going to be able to repair something like that as quickly. If it's not damaged very much, like it's a minor permit, that's fine. We can do that later. But the ones that are between 40 and 70%, where someone might start repairing immediately, those should be prioritized first because they're the closest to 50%. And so if they need to come into compliance, they can't, do that right away. So define the scope and then determine how long you think it's going to take to complete the assessments. Because once you've done the data collection, then we have to process all of that and get those determinations out. And so finally, you're putting together this plan, like who's going where for data collection, what the teams are, the schedule, and then hopefully you have someone to assist you with data and quality assurance to stay on track with that and to double check work because we want quality and consistency in that data. So they need to start immediately reviewing those inspections and then verify that it's being done right because missed errors can cost a couple of days of work to correct. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So the field prep, again, we want to alert these other departments that we're going to be out there and when and for how long. Issue a press release. Let people know that you're going to be out doing inspections or that people from your office will be. What the hours of operation are, who to contact, and why you have to do assessments. And then you want to gather that data. So you have the property and structure data that have been assigned to these two-person teams. You have the floodplain boundaries, and then meet with the tax assessor to discuss what data you're going to need and the format that they can send it to you in to determine how much of their time they're going to need to assemble that data. So basically, we need information about these structures. When were they built? How much have they depreciated? Based on that, um, basic structure data is what we need, and definitely any appraisal information. You might need like recent tax data to help determine what the market value is, and there's several methods, and we'll get into that, to establishing market value. And then again, how many inspections do we have to do by each team? How many can be done in one day? So how many days it's going to take, and then a target date for the completion of that field work, and then hopefully a target date for the completion of your determinations. So basically, you would need to understand what data needs to be collected for NFIP requirements, understand the tool if you're going to use that. So there's no requirement to use this software, but it's just something that FEMA put together to assist communities in putting together consistent assessments. Coordinate with the collection of field materials, verify the hours per day and days per week, working with those city officials so they know what's going on, and then ensure the procedures and requirements of the SDE manager are followed. So the inspection lead, it could be the same person as the SDE manager, just depending on what your situation is. But ideally, someone is tracking this field work and tracking team progress, verifies the collected data, and that it's recorded in the tool. So the data should be accompanied by photos that establish this information, and then review the data for correctness, and then find solutions to problems. And then there could be areas that are inaccessible and require permission to enter. And I would imagine there's probably some people that wouldn't want, people in their house. So that would be, part of the conflict resolution. Again, this is difficult to deal with as far as floodplain management goes. You'll probably encounter some difficult people, so there's the conflict resolution part of it. So yeah, you might need to get permission to enter certain areas, and then find a point of contact, street, subdivision, operating hours, potential level of damage for these areas, and then compiling the tax data. So this is what we need for the structure information. So there's a tab in the tool that I'll show you for the structure data, and it's called the NFIP info tab. So we review that before going into the field to save time, and then reduce later entry needed. So basically, we want to have this database already established in the tool before we ever go into the field. So basically, just an inventory of the structures that you have in the floodplain, what are those addresses, and then which ones have to be assessed after something happens. So we want to sort them alphabetically by street name, and then numerically by their address, and then the data, depending on how it comes to you, it could have limited sorting abilities. It could be sorted by owner name or parcel number. So again, that's why it's important to have this put together before something happens, so that you know how it's organized and it's already in the tool. And if it's sent to you, the tool does have the ability to import XLS or CSV files. So you can just copy that to the database first, but you have to tell the software which fields correspond with which. So yeah, there's detailed instructions in the user manual, which is also embedded into the tool. And best practices, that document that I talked about, also has information on importing and how to organize it. So It's not as difficult as I might be making it sound. It's just, organizing it and sorting it and then I guess establishing your scope. So once you have that, it should be kind of like plug and chug. Verify the locations at the physical inspection, so the square footage and number of stories. So we want to verify that because we need to know that for doing the assessment. So there's tabs in the tool for you to enter that information. So verify the tax data with the inspection findings. So we're just doing that cross check to make sure that it's accurate. And then structure data, again, that can be preloaded. You can work on when you have your property inventory, you can put in that information, how many stories it has, what the square footage is, and then the assessment data would be, collected in the field. When that individual structure record is open, that's when you can enter the assessment data. And as I mentioned, there's an enterprise import function for multiple property structure data. So yeah, the SDE tool is available online. As I said, it's free to download. You can just search for SDE 3.0 FEMA, and that will pull it up. Again, the software includes the user manual, but I find it easier to just pull it up online. It just functions better that way. The tool kind of has it as not a PDF document, but I don't know, it's just easier. I found it easier to just look it up online. There's two ways you can set it up. You can do a standalone, which is what I have because I've only used it for training, but the users of that host computer can access the database, or you can have the client server version where multiple users can access it from the database once they get mapped to it on the network drive. So again, I think it's pretty user-friendly. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Again, sometimes substantial damage only needs to be done for one structure. So I've had several cases like that recently, and both of those houses burned down in different communities. And so they were substantially damaged, and both of them had basements, and it was not very popular to tell people that they have to fill in their basements and then have a new foundation where the lowest floor is at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. But that's the requirement. Anytime there's a basement, it pretty much has to be filled in because the lowest floor has to come into compliance. And so basements are typically just not allowed for new construction. So that's probably one thing that's kind of unique to this area that we have to deal with a lot is basements. People have older houses that have a lot of basements before it was mapped in. So um, there is apparently a misconception that damage estimation is only done when there's a presidential disaster declaration or that someone else is going to do it. And that's not true. It comes down to the floodplain administrator who is responsible for doing this anytime there's damage to a structure in the floodplain. And so, or multiple structures. All right. So I was going to say something and then I kind of lost it, but so this is Coffeyville in 2007. So the levee was overtopped and then a refinery was flooded and then a leak happened. And so this company ended up having to do like 400 buyouts. So again, it could be a widespread disaster, but we're only concerned about the areas of floodplain, so there's that. And of course, you can reach out for help. And some communities have MOUs with other communities for disaster assistance. So that might be something that you'd consider, or maybe just discuss with like the county, or just figuring out what your resources would be if something happened. I would consider that an important part of preparation. So again, value versus repairs is the percent of damage. So the fair market value prior to damage. So you compare what that is to the cost of repairs, and there's different ways to determine that. So the cost of repairs versus the market value to return the structure to the same condition prior to damage, not the pristine condition, because we do take into account depreciation, which I think I mentioned. But basically, when was it built and how much has it depreciated over time? So that's built into the tool. But if that percentage of damage is equal to or greater than 50%, then it's considered substantially damaged. So using this software may not be required if you have a contractor's estimation or an adjuster claim data, although claim data may not be as reliable if something's been underinsured. But the tax assessment, so property tax, that's like public information that everyone has access to. So um, that's enough information to plug into the formula, and you can enter that data into the tool manually. So we've had some communities just require people to give them an estimate from a licensed contractor and require them to provide an appraisal. So if that's something you want to require, you should put it in writing. And basically, whatever your process is for doing damage assessments, it should be put in writing somewhere. And that way you have a reliable process that's written out, and then you can do it consistently every time for everybody. And that way no one says you're favoring someone or attacking someone. You have this consistent process that's written down, and you do it the same way for everybody, and then there's a written process for people to appeal what your decisions are. So we give them the due process ability to appeal that decision. So, um, right. So the structure's value is the fair market value of the structure only. So we have to take that out of the equation, the land, because that will definitely skew values depending on where it is. Obviously, some places are more desirable than others. So appraisals typically will have that kind of itemized out, what the value of the actual structure is, and then the property is something separate. So it's just the structure by itself. And again, you can use tax assessment records, bill of sale if it's been a recent sale. Again, there could be issues with an insurance settlement if it's been underinsured. And then an appraisal is pretty accurate. A licensed appraiser provides that. So discuss the, or sorry, exclude the land value and then yeah, make sure that's out. I've seen assessments that have included it, and then something that was supposed to be substantially damaged was declared not substantially damaged. Um, okay, so this is the square footage calculator, so you can compute the actual cash value, and FEMA accepts that as market value. And so this is built into the tool that you can determine or calculate what the actual cash value is based on whatever the base cost is for square footage. And so that's based on the geography. So you can look that up. There are cost estimating guides, and then you would put in the geographic adjustment factor, and that's that comes in the cost estimating guide. There could be a locally developed base cost. So you would enter whatever that value is, and then there's a just basic 1 through 5 level of depreciation, and then whatever the original construction quality was. And so that's that drop-down menu that you see at the bottom. It asks you like what was the original quality that this structure was built at, and I think most of them would just be average. And then any cost adjustments that you need to put in there. So any unique characteristics to uh, a structure, like if they had randomly like a really expensive fireplace or like a crystal chandelier or something like that, that you might have to enter in there to just kind of balance that out. And so again, there's plenty of information in the user guide, and you can click on those little question marks and it'll give you more information about what they're asking for. And so basically, like based on the square footage and cost per square foot, You would calculate that value and then however many stories, and so it has that multiplier. And so once you enter all of this information, you come out with a number. And so that's one method of coming up with the market value. So that's where that structure information comes in. So that's one method. Again, you can just enter in an appraisal or something like that if you have other reliable information. Again, those documents go deep into detail about how to do this. All right. So yeah, again, the cost adjustments, non-standard features in a structure, a fireplace, a porch, an upgraded roof, a floor quality of a component exceeds normal features in initial construction quality. Um, if there's any other adjustments that you think need to be made, you can use, again, the cost estimating guides to help you determine that value. So if your community has an appraiser that works, for the city, they would be, a really useful resource when you have to do these assessments. So what do we have to include in the cost of repairs? So it's the materials used, even if they're donated, we have to price everything out as at its regular cost, no matter what the actual cost is, things that are donated, donated labor, yeah, cost of labor. Um, there's cost estimating guides for this as well. What qualified labor would cost, we have to factor that in, regardless of if the property owner is doing their own repairs or whatever the case may be, we are including that. And so I have the full list on the next slide of what's included and excluded, but again, even repairs that people choose not to make, we're still factoring that into what the cost of repair is. Applies to materials and labor that's donated. So this is the full list. So we don't have to go through all of this, but you can find this in the substantial improvement in damage desk reference guide that I showed you. So that way, if you're ever unsure, you can go in there and look at it. But labor, excavation, demolition, debris removal, the cost of elevating the structure. So that's something I think that gets missed. Basically, if the lowest floor is below the base flood elevation, that's where the compliance element comes in. And so we have to factor in what the cost of elevating that structure would be, which is most likely going to put it over because that's quite expensive to elevate an existing structure. So, yeah, I was looking into this yesterday. I kind of forgot that part for a second, but yeah, the cost of elevating the structure, if it's already elevated above the base flood elevation, then it should be good. The NFIP minimum is that it has to be at or above the base flood elevation. I haven't quite considered how that comes into play with the freeboard, but I think it has to be at or above the freeboard level to not have to be elevated. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Construction management contractor, and then anything to do with the actual structure itself, any elements or finishes that are attached to that structure have to be assessed. So walls, joists, finishes, windows, roofing, hardware, any built-in appliances, the insulation, the utility, the HVAC system, the plumbing, all of that has to be assessed and included in the cost of repairs. And then you can see on the right side what can be excluded. So any like cleanup, permitting costs, overhead or plan preparation, any outdoor improvement, anything to do with the surrounding property is not included. Again, any cited violation that was previously cited by a community official of any of those other codes, and then plug-in appliances that are not attached to the structure, those don't count. So the sources for the cost to repair can come from an itemized cost of materials and labor. Again, some communities just require people to provide that. Building valuation tables, cost estimating guides, or a qualified estimate if you have a local official working for you that has those types of qualifications and their professional judgment. And then the building owners, this is the least reliable because they're not objective to the situation, but they would have to provide you documentation that shows that backs up what they're saying the cost of repairs is. So receipts and things like that. You don't want to take their word for it. You need some kind of documentation from them. So another aspect of this is deferred maintenance. So anything that was wrong with the structure prior to damage, and I realize that might be difficult to determine, but we're basically not looking at peeling paint or old shingles or window caulking because those were there and present before the damage occurred. So again, we're looking for the cost to repair to pre-damage condition and not you know, pristine. So again, one way to resolve disputes is to just not have them, have everything spelled out in writing, and the same rules apply to everybody. So those written rules can be approved by a governing body. And just some other tips. You can't use the insurance, obviously, if the property owner didn't have insurance. You don't want to rely on that. Again, one community in Kansas told everyone to get a contractor's estimate and then turn it into the local floodplain manager, and they put that in writing, and then that's just what they did. So again, you want to determine what your process is now before something happens, and you don't want to have to do that on the fly, just so that you have all of this prepared and ready to go. Right, so these are kind of the notes that I read on the previous slide. But yeah, don't allow property owners or contractors to assess the damages because they're not objective, and contractors might be trying to generate business, but that's a little bit different from the same as an estimate. So they can get a licensed contractor to estimate that. It's different than, the contractor that they're working with to do repairs. So inconsistencies in your process will legitimize your assessments community-wide. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Be consistent. Some communities, again, institute a moratorium on issuing permits until the scope and location of damage is evaluated. Again, people are trying to repair immediately as soon as something has happened, so we want to avoid that. That's a great idea. Put a moratorium on any permits until you have the scope and at least your field damage put into place. You can issue permits if the property owner can provide a contractor's estimate proving that it's less than 50%. Remember, some communities practice cumulative improvement, and so we have to track that and keep track of those permits from the last 5 years to compare that and add that into the equation of how much repair or improvement. Because again, improvements have to be included as well. So non-residential, it's a little bit simpler. These are the elements that they have you look at: the foundation, superstructure, roof, plumbing, electric, interiors, and HVAC. So it's less detailed in that regard. There's less characteristics than the residential percentages. And so again, the field guide kind of tells you what to look for and how to gauge that percentage of damage. And you want to train your teams to be consistent and maybe do a couple of assessments together before you send them out, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page about how we gauge the level of damage. So this is the residential. Again, there's a couple more elements like exterior finishes, appliances, the HVAC, all that stuff. And so that's where these are the tabs where you actually enter in the levels of damage to those elements. And then this is a screenshot from the field guide on what to look for. So if you're looking at the interior finish, damaged or broken, warped interior walls, framing studs, check for wicking of water or moisture inside of drywall and insulation. And you want to check that above the level of the high water mark because it travels upward inside the wall, and then there can be mold growing almost immediately. So this goes over what to look for and how to guide or how to gauge that level of damage. And so here's what the software can and can't do. It can give you an organized approach for doing your assessments. It's reasonable and defensible. It's FEMA approved. Demonstration of compliance with the NFIP. It's structure-specific summary reports that you can generate and then sign. They're excellent to go out with your determination letters. And those summary reports can support people's ICC claims, which is a separate claim. If you're substantially damaged and you have NFIP insurance, they'll give you an extra $30,000 to help you come into compliance. Um, but the limitations on it, it doesn't give you exact values. It's based on your input. And then there are three options for determining structure value and damages. And so the determinations depend on what you put into it. But that's why people have the option to provide you with better data. If they give you better information to argue their claim of being substantially damaged or not substantially damaged, then we have that recourse for them. So the database information, select server if you're in charge of assigning damage assessments, client if you're an inspector receiving assignments, or standalone if you're not a supervisor or a client. So that's what the standalone is what's being shown for this training, because again, that's what I have, because most of my knowledge about this is just training based. And so make sure to hit save, basically. Anytime you go between tabs, just make sure to hit save, and that will just help you out, because you could lose data if you don't hit save and you go between tabs. And so again, the user manual is right there. You can also look it up online, as I mentioned, sorry. So it allows you to add photos into the assessments. It has spell check and again, the enterprise import. The old version of the software only had residential, and then the new version has the non-residential as well. And basically, when you're looking through those non-residential building types, you just want to hit a best fit. So it has like schools, hospitals, warehouse, stuff like that. You just want to hit whatever is the best fit for that. A few common mistakes. Brick veneer is a type of siding. It's basically an exterior finish. It's not part of the superstructure, so you want to make sure that you're not looking at it as real brick. Uninhabitable doesn't always mean that it's substantially damaged. So emergency management might put a marker that says it's uninhabitable because of a gas leak, and that can be fixed and it's not substantially damaged. And then apartment buildings should be assessed as non-residential because they're business-like, I guess, is the thought behind that. Although I don't know because they are used residentially, so they do have those residential elements on the inside, so might be a bit of a judgment call there. So training the inspectors, again, have some pilot inspections all together so that people are on the same page and you've gone through the worksheets together. So we do have worksheets available like on our website. We have our post-disaster manual that I send out quite often, and that has some template worksheets that you can go through. So people collecting data in the field, if they want to like handwrite damage and notes like that, or maybe you'll do it digitally and everybody has tablets, but either way, we do have that available. The differences between residential and non-residential, so you want to mix it up and do some of both. Explain the benefits of using the tool, review GPS units and data required for a valid assessment. Typically, residential assessments are 40 to 90 minutes and non-residential 40 to 120. And then not all elements are equal. Some will contribute more to the market value, such as the foundation. Um, so this is what it looks like when you open the tool, basically. So you can view or search a property, you can edit, add new properties, add a residential assessment or add a non-residential assessment, and then down on the bottom is where you have the import functions, and then you can review all the reports that you have. So again, just get in there and get comfortable with it. So you start by adding a property, and then they have information for the property details, which are based on your community. What is your community name, the state, your NFIP community ID number. So they do have this where you can pre-populate this information, and then some of it might need to be changed, like different um, flood zones. Some of them might be on different map panels depending on your situation and how many panels you have. But a lot of this can pre-populate. Um, and so basically, um, this is the type of information. And this was an example that we had before, just basically like a structure in Emporia in Lyon County that was residential. This was my old boss's information, but just as an example, like what it could look like. Basic information about that structure and the property data. Um, Again, judgment call, what was the initial construction quality, 1 through 6? What's the depreciation? Gauge that on how old it is, and then the percent damage of those elements. So you can find this information through elevation certificate from your permit files. Again, the county appraiser is a great resource. Nationally recognized cost estimation guides. A lot of appraisers do have those. Flood maps and the field inspections. So you want to have an establishing shot like this, and then one with like a whiteboard of the property address, or like take a picture of the mailbox or something that establishes what the address is for that structure. You want to have the flood map. So formats are going to come into handy. The lat and long from the GIS department, or like the GIS units that you're using. Definitely take pictures of the high water lines. Yeah, that's useful information to have. And it can help you estimate the amount of damage looking at how deeply that structure was inundated. Um, and so this is like an appraiser website. So I look at these all the time. Basically, you can do a parcel search in most counties. So public information, you can find usually the construction dates and more details about it, like what kind of style of construction, how many stories it has. So this is very useful information. Square footage, grade factor, building value, owners' names, very useful resource. So if you add a new assessment, so you pick from your property list and you start a new assessment, it asks you what property you want to select. So you select that. And then again, all of this pre-populated information, some of it might have to be edited. And then from there, you go into all the structure data, um, check the address, check if it's the same as the structure address. So their information basically. And then hit save. Save often, save early, save often. And then if it thinks you're missing something, it'll put up a little like red warning sign if you've forgotten to add something, or if it just kind of has these little checks for you to make sure that this is correct, and then of course hit save. And then of course the address tab, which we looked at, there's lots of drop downs like road, avenue, boulevard, whatever. There's these drop down menus. Um, just making sure you have the street suffix right. And then it goes into what the cause of damage is. So there's flood, I think fire, earthquake, and other things are choosable in that drop down. The date of the damage, the date of the assessment, who the inspector is, what their phone number is. If you choose flood, it asks you what the duration and depth were. And so it just kind of has these extra options to make it more detailed. So any special notes about the property that you want to add in there. Sure, community has 1 foot of freeboard. That's good to know. There could be issues I haven't had any. I haven't noticed any of these error messages. They may have improved it since over the last couple of years, but that could happen. Basically, type of residence. There's like multifamily, single family, but you understand. Structure tab just has all of these details about the specific property. And then the cost. So as I said, you can calculate from square footage on the summary tab. If you are skipping over this, there's a way to just click appraisal. But basically, as I said, you pick the structure shape and then like how many stories, you have the base cost of square footage, and then it'll just calculate it for you if you're using that method. Um, or you can enter square footage manually, however you want to do it. But this will help you calculate the square footage as people, did I say that right? Square footage as people should be taking measurements of the structure out in the field just to verify that. Yeah. And then that'll give you the computed actual cash value, which is a way to do market value. It's not the only way. Again, depreciation, we talked about this, very poor condition or requires extensive repairs, whatever that pre-condition is. If it's not pristine, we factor in the depreciation that's happened over time. Um, yeah, excellent condition, usually like a newer structure or something like that. Again, the cost estimating guides are available. Again, you can use home sales if it's been a recent sale, but again, we have to factor in that we have to exclude the land value. Again, cost estimating guides, so they have this as software now, so CoreLogic has this. Again, it can be expensive, so check with your appraiser to see if they have any. The element percentages, as I said, the field guide will help you determine what to look for to gauge that. And then if it's obviously, substantially damaged, don't waste time on doing an assessment. Just mark that down, take the photos, organize it with all the property data. But if it's obviously like off its foundation or completely destroyed, we don't have to go through that process. But again, the most appeals are between 40 and 70%. That's the ones that we prioritize doing first, and they need greater precision. We need to really look at that because it's going to, determine whether or not it's above or below or equal to 50%. And that's a big deal for property owners. This is what our worksheet looks like. Again, this is totally available online, or I can send it to you, whichever, but we have these worksheets already available. And then finally, once you've done this, so you can see where it says computed damages, you can also just factor in like contractor estimate, or if you have a professional that works for your community that is qualified, you can have them for the community estimate option for the cost of repairs, and then computed actual cash value, or you have the option to just click professional appraisal, or if you're using the property tax data, there's an option for that. And then you would just be able to put that in that amount into those boxes, and then it will calculate for you how much damage, percent damage. So in this example, it was 56.5% damages, and then it'll put together a little report that you can put with your letter that you send to the property owner, and then they can appeal it if they disagree. So that's what it looks like on the other options where I've clicked appraisal, and then I can just put that information in there. Yeah. So definitely add these photos. This is how you upload the photos. So after the output summary photos, upload it. Make sure you have an establishing shot like this, and then property address like that right up close. And that way you have it all organized with your assessment and you know which property we're looking at for sure. And then this is where you can print the summary report, and it's really nice. They have, sorry, this is what it looks like. They have a little signature line that you can put with your letter. And basically this will show people how you did the assessment and what you looked at, and your letter will explain how to appeal it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't hit save, some of this information will be missing, and then you'd have to go back to the tabs and put that in. Um, So I'd have just two more slides. So again, code violations are not damage as long as it's been cited. A pre-damage condition, not perfect condition, and then oh gosh. Okay, a finished basement has flooded multiple times. The owner wants to restore it, but planning to leave the basement unfinished. Does it get included? Yes, it does, because it was finished before the disaster. And again, many times you have to tell people that they have to fill in their basement. So that is something to be aware of. And then dispute resolution. You don't agree with the assessment that I've put together, so here's your alternative. You can send me licensed general contractor estimates. A professional estimator can provide me information. The insurance adjusted estimate, you can provide me that. Disaster damage estimate groups. So there are other groups that might be working in the area and doing these estimations. And then provide me your market value from a licensed appraiser and exclude the land. Again, written administrative procedures establish this process for recourse for them, establish what your process is going to be, and then um, make sure that you're consistent with everybody. Okay, so I went over a little bit. I'm sorry, and I know I kind of rushed there at the end, but please contact us with any questions that you might have. Me and Caitlin are here anytime, and of course, available to assist with any disasters that might happen as much as we can. Okay, I'll just stop share, and so I'm going to look at the chat if there's anything. Okay, and then just let us know if you want a certificate and if you're a CFM. Some people just like having their certificate, and I'll be sure to get those out as quickly as possible, but we'll be out all next week. So Darren said you found there's an online class through FEMA on how the program works and haven't done it yet. Yeah, so that's another resource that we have. Um, If the estimate to a fix includes pre-existing conditions like a roof, then we can deduct. Yes, deduct anything that you are aware of or that they can prove was pre-existing. I feel like that could get a little dicey, but yeah, stuff that's pre-existing is supposed to be deducted and excluded. Yeah, I've never done a real life assessment, guys. I've only done training and been in training, so um yeah, if there's someone that's more experienced, that would be really helpful to have in an emergency like that. But yeah, all right. Well, let us know if you have any other questions, and we appreciate you being with us today.